In life, we make hasty conclusions. That's why I divorced, because I saw gold in another woman. I was 24 when I first started to feel my life unravel. Up until then, everything seemed perfect, or at least I thought it was. I'd been married to Jenny for 2 years. We had the kind of marriage everyone thought was ideal. Friends would come over and tell us we were goals. From the outside, we looked happy, but inside, where it mattered most, the cracks had already started to form. The smiles we gave each other felt forced, the conversations were hollow, and any intimacy we had shared in the beginning was all but gone. Then, she came into my life, Angela. She didn't come in like a wrecking ball, not at first. She started out as just another employee. She was a bright-eyed, energetic woman, and she joined our company as a marketing assistant. I was her boss, and from the moment she stepped into my office for her interview, I knew something had shifted inside me. Angela was different. She had a quiet confidence, a spark that made it hard to look away. I tried to shake it off, remind myself I was married, but every time she smiled or laughed, I felt something stir in me. As time went on, I noticed myself looking forward to seeing Angela at work. I'd tell myself it was just because she was good at her job. She was smart, efficient, always ahead of deadlines. But deep down, I knew it was something more. And yet, I couldn't allow myself to act on it. I was married. Jenny was my wife. We had a life together, a dog, Count, a sweet mutt who spent most of his time in the yard, and a comfortable routine. But that's the problem with routines. They start to feel like traps. At home, things with Jenny were stagnant. It wasn't just that the excitement of the early days had faded. It was as if we'd stopped caring altogether. She'd lie on the couch for hours, scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging my existence. The house was always a mess, dinner was never prepared, and our dog, Count, was often forgotten. I'd come home from work exhausted, only to find him whining by the door, waiting to be fed. It was as if I was the only one in the marriage actually trying. Jenny, on the other hand, had checked out. She refused to work because, as she put it, "I'm not going to work when you're making enough for both of us." It wasn't just about the money, though. She didn't care about anything. Not the house, not me, not even herself. It was like she had turned into a different person from the one I'd married. I tried to talk to her about it, tried to tell her I needed more from her, but every conversation ended the same way, with her rolling her eyes and telling me I was overreacting. One day I got sick. Not just a little cold or flu, this was the kind of illness that makes your body feel like it's been run over by a truck. Fever, chills, the works. I needed help, and I hoped Jenny would step up just this once. She didn't. Instead, she stayed glued to her phone, occasionally glancing up to ask me if I could run to the store for more snacks. I couldn't believe it. There I was, barely able to stand, and she couldn't even muster the energy to get me medicine or ask how I was feeling. I realized then that Jenny didn't just neglect our marriage. She neglected me as a person, but I had to push through, despite how awful I felt. My job was going through a critical phase. We had a big project that needed my attention, and being the kind of person who couldn't just let things go, I dragged myself to the office, pale and sweating. I must have looked like death warmed over, but I was determined to get through the day. Angela noticed immediately. She walked into my office for a quick update on a campaign, but the moment she saw me, her brow furrowed in concern. "Dan, you look awful," she said, setting down her papers. Before I could brush it off, she ran out of the office, saying, "I'll be back in a minute." I didn't think much of it at the time. 10 minutes later, she returned, carrying a bag full of medicine, vitamin drinks, and even a warm bowl of soup from the cafe down the street. She handed me the bag and sat down across from me, insisting I take a break. "You're not superhuman, you know," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You need to take care of yourself." I stared at her, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, Someone cared, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. I didn't know what to say, so I just thanked her, quietly. Angela didn't make a big deal out of it. She just smiled, got up, and left me to rest. That moment changed everything. A few days later, I was feeling better, both physically and emotionally. Work was getting back on track, and Angela and I found ourselves working late one evening after a long day of meetings. Jenny, of course, hadn't come to the company event that evening. She didn't want to waste her time on something boring. I didn't mind. If I was being honest with myself, I preferred it that way. As the office emptied out, Angela and I were the last two left. I offered to drive her home since it was late and the buses were infrequent in our part of town. She hesitated for a moment before agreeing, flashing me that familiar, warm smile that had become a highlight of my day. We got into my car, and the drive started out lighthearted. We talked about work, joked about some of our co-workers, and shared funny stories from our childhoods. But then, the conversation shifted. Angela paused before speaking, her voice softer now. "Dan, I've been meaning to ask, are you happy?" I glanced over at her, caught off guard by the question. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to buy some time, though deep down I knew exactly what she meant. "With your life," she continued. "Your marriage. You just seem like you're carrying a lot." I was quiet for a moment, staring at the road ahead. I wanted to say everything was fine. I wanted to tell her that my marriage was just going through a rough patch and that things would get better. But the truth was, I didn't know if they would, or if I even wanted them to. "No," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "I'm not happy." Angela didn't push for more. She didn't need to. I could feel the weight of the conversation pressing down on both of us as we drove in silence the rest of the way to her apartment. When we arrived, she thanked me for the ride and got out of the car, pausing for a moment as if she wanted to say something more. But she didn't. She just smiled sadly and walked away. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but Angela was right. I wasn't happy. I hadn't been happy in a long time. And it wasn't just because of Jenny's laziness or her lack of interest in our marriage. It was because I had stopped feeling connected to her at all. I didn't want to go home anymore. I didn't want to see her, and the truth hit me like a freight train. I didn't love Jenny anymore. I had been staying in the marriage out of habit, out of some misguided sense of obligation. But love, it was gone. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had started to look forward to my time with Angela. How she made me feel like I mattered, like I was seen. The decision to leave Jenny wasn't easy, but in the end, it was the only choice. When I finally sat her down to talk, it was clear she hadn't seen this coming. She looked shocked, angry, even a little confused. "You're leaving me?" she asked, her voice rising. "Because of some work crush?" "It's not about Angela," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's about us. We haven't been happy for a long time, Jenny. You know that." "Speak for yourself," she snapped, crossing her arms. "I'm perfectly happy. You're the one with the problem." That stung, but I knew it wasn't true. She wasn't happy either. She just didn't care enough to do anything about it. The conversation didn't last long. We both knew there wasn't much left to say. She agreed to let me leave, and I packed my things that night. It felt surreal, walking out of the house we had shared for 2 years. Count, our dog, whined as I left, and for a moment I wondered if I'd missed the life I was leaving behind. But as I drove away, the weight on my chest started to lift. After the separation, I moved into a small apartment closer to work. For the first time in years, I felt free. I had space, both mentally and physically, to think about what I really wanted. And what I wanted, more than anything, was to explore the feelings I had for Angela. I didn't rush things with her. I didn't want to make the same mistakes again. We continued working together, and I began dropping hints. Subtle ones at first, like inviting her to lunch or staying late to help with a project. I felt like I was 15 again, giddy and nervous, hoping she'd reciprocate the feelings I was starting to have for her. But every time I hinted at something more, Angela would pull back. It wasn't that she was cold or distant, she just seemed hesitant. There was always a look in her eyes, like she was holding something back. But I couldn't figure out what it was. One evening after work, we found ourselves alone in the office again. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. "Angela," I started, my heart pounding in my chest. "I think we've both been feeling something, but I need to ask. Is there a reason you're holding back?" Angela looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or uncertainty. She hesitated before speaking. "I like you, Dan. I really do. But there's something you need to know." I froze, suddenly unsure of what she was about to tell me. Was she seeing someone else? Was she not interested? My mind raced. Angela took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." My brain short-circuited. Pregnant? But how? When? Before I could ask any of the million questions swirling in my head, Angela continued. "It's not what you think," she said quickly, seeing the confusion on my face. "The father isn't you. It's not anyone at work. It's my ex. He left when he found out, and I've been dealing with it on my own." I sat down, feeling like the wind had been knocked out of me. I hadn't expected this. I had been so caught up in my feelings for Angela that I hadn't even considered the possibility that she had her own life outside of work, her own complications. "I didn't want to tell you," she said softly, "because I didn't want to ruin whatever this is between us. But you deserve to know the truth." I stared at her, trying to process everything. Part of me wanted to run, to get as far away from this complicated situation as possible. But another part of me, the part that had fallen for her, wanted to stay, to figure out if we could make this work. Angela stood up, clearly uncomfortable with the silence. "I'll understand if this changes things," she said quietly. "I just thought you should know." I looked up at her, my heart pounding in my chest. In that moment, I realized something. I didn't care. I didn't care about the complications or the baggage or the unexpected twists life had thrown our way. "I don't care," I said finally, standing up to face her. "I don't care about any of that. I care about you." Angela blinked, clearly surprised. "You don't have to." "I want to," I interrupted, stepping closer to her. "I want to be here, with you, whatever that means." For a long moment we stood there, the air thick with tension, and then finally Angela smiled. A real, genuine smile that made my heart skip a beat. "Okay," she whispered. And just like that, the unexpected became our new normal. Over the next few months, Angela and I navigated the complexities of our new relationship. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I questioned whether we were doing the right thing. But through it all, we stuck together. I helped her through the pregnancy, attending doctor's appointments and making sure she had everything she needed. We became a team, stronger than I ever thought we could be. As for Jenny, she moved on too. She ended up getting back together with an old flame from high school, and from what I heard through mutual friends, she was happy. Life has a funny way of surprising you. I thought I knew what my future would look like, but in the end, it was nothing like I expected. And yet, standing beside Angela, watching her belly grow with the life we would share in some way, I realized something important. Sometimes, the best things come from the most unexpected places. And though the road to get here was messy, painful, and full of twists I never saw coming, I wouldn't change a thing. Because for the first time in years, I was truly, genuinely happy.